Hi, I'm Jason Gorber from thatshelf.com, and we're here to talk about Guy Ritchie's latest film, Wrath of Man.
Big change.
Now, Guy Ritchie is no stranger to doing heist films. He's done a bunch of them before, but it was weird watching this one. I mean, it's been a strange time for cinema at the best of times, where we've been sort of craving that sort of that audience thrill. Look, I've been watching a lot of festival films, many of them. I thought, oh man, this would be really great to watch with a crowd. But this felt the sort of first sort of non-festively kind of mainstream almost film. Frankly, the kind of films that I grew up watching, these sort of semi-clever but still really deeply genre films that frankly a ton of quote-unquote international or foreign films have exploited for many years. At its best, Wrath of Man feels like one of these great genre picks that we've been seeing, that where this kind of movie has frankly been relegated. We're either getting these giant blockbusters or these sort of dour indies, or this really sort of straight ahead, sometimes effective but not always effective kind of romps. Whenever there's a heist film, you think now of Fast and the Furious or Mission Impossible or something like that. These big grandiose things. Whereas this very much feels it has a great deal of, for lack of a better word, sort of gritty 1970s credibility to it. Look, fantastic heist film with Baby Driver, but even that was heightened a very musical, for lack of a better word. Edgar Wright, I think of it as his first musical. There's these elements drawn from everything from American in Paris on down that sort of give that a slightly different look. Nonetheless, I think Guy Ritchie is really sort of bringing that sort of his love of this kind of cinema to the fore. And what better foil, what better sort of central character than somebody like Jason Statham, the greatest Jason action star ever. Yes, Jason Lee, Statham's better than you. I think that the film requires a little bit of investment, for lack of a better word. When it opens up, there's a really, I think, really interesting opening shot that is basically, it's almost like security camera footage, and you're only getting glimpses of what's taking place. And for me, that's a moment that's either going to like completely throw you off, or do what I did and sort of lean in and actually get interested in what's being, that we're getting a sprinkling of some information here, and we know inevitably it's going to be filled in as the story goes along. There's a lot of temporal back and forth, 5 months ahead, 3 months back, etc., that again is slightly convoluted. Nothing like Tenet, let's be clear, but nonetheless, you definitely have to pay attention to where we are in the narrative arc, which crew is sort of being involved here, how all these people play in, because there's actually relatively little in the way of exposition. It's very much about how it plays out, and that's something that I thoroughly enjoyed. But you also have to get over to the opening sort of first 10, 15 minutes, shows a lot of people being incredibly obnoxious. There's this weird sort of, not weird, there's this undercurrent of homophobia and sort of broisms, locker room nonsense that takes place inside this armored car place, which is absolutely in keeping with this sort of style and the spirit of these individuals. I mean, I've argued with somebody that was like, oh, it's too much, I didn't need to see this. I'm like, well, sure, you don't need to like these people. That's the whole point of the film, is that not all these people are likable, that the moral grayness is exactly what it's dealing with. And yes, some of these like very over-the-top stuff, this kind of, again, locker room nonsense, is absolutely endemic in workplace environments such as this one. This sort of rent-a-cop sort of mentality very much plays around. Sure, there are many who deal with their professionalism in different ways, but it is no surprise whatsoever that when the cameras are off, as it were, you're going to get this kind of sort of weird banter, this sort of hyper-masculinized ridiculousness that the film very much toys with, is that it shows up and you have this very quiet individual coming in, again, the Statham character, and these other sort of bozos basically bullying and doing all the other kind of crazy stuff in order for you to sort of fall into your specific judgments about these characters, and then it's undercut and undercut and undercut, and it's really interesting how the film goes about doing that. In terms of like an action film, it's great. Not over the top. There's nothing superhuman about anything that takes place. It's just a bunch of people who are very good at their jobs, namely stealing stuff, putting everything together. And as I said, when there's all this back and forth, this sort of narrative back and forth, different timelines talking to one another, it's all eminently believable. It makes for the crosses and double crosses all the more enjoyable. Look, this is not a some perfect masterpiece, but I thoroughly enjoyed just the pleasure of watching something done with a great deal of craft and, I believe, narrative sophistication. That it's a smart version of a dumb movie, and I really love that kind of thing. It absolutely echoes everything from. I mean, Heat is an obvious example of a film that has all of that sort of gangsterism going on, but a bunch of character work actually playing out. Except instead of having people nearly as loquacious as De Niro and Pacino, the sort of real talky actors, you have somebody completely taciturn, somebody like Statham, who you just know he is so clearly committed to doing what he needs to do that he just exudes this incredibly fearsome competence. He just absolutely has this aura around him, and I think the casting of him is absolutely perfect. He can do over the top. Anybody who's seen Hobbs and Shaw knows that he can actually live in that kind of world. But here, it's so taut, and it reminds very much of other films. I mean, Soderbergh's Limey comes to mind, but everything from the total cacophony of something like the 70s films, French Connection, all of that, the Dirty Harry films, all of this stuff sort of speaks, sort of informs this film. But in many ways, I think this is much more depth. This is much more sophisticated in how it actually plays out, without ever not being entertaining, which is what I actually really enjoyed about it. So yeah, Wrath of Man, a hell of a lot of fun. Definitely something worth seeking out. Just be patient with it. I think that you're going to go in and immediately have expectations that it's just this sort of dumb throwaway action film, or you're going to get really annoyed at all the character beats, and really these things really sort of collide and form really the core of what makes this film pretty terrific. For ThatShelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Please subscribe, please follow us on social media, and we'll see you next film. All the best.